I don't know if it's on my line or your line, or maybe they don't want me to say anymore. But either way, I'm still going to be foolish enough to say it. So anyway, so he died exactly 666 days before the first day of 2001.
Really incredible.
Well, it is. I'm not quite sure what to make of it.
This is really kind of remarkable. So let's see if we can just roll with this.
Yeah,
and keep
cool.
going. Yeah, we'll fill in the blanks. Okay.
All right. So 666 days before the January 1st, 2001 was the day that Stanley Kubrick died, and I was in France, and he started showing his films on TV and at night after midnight, and I was watching them, drifting from hotel to hotel in Paris, and I fell in love with Stanley Kubrick on that night, and around those few nights that they were doing that. I went home to my home up in the mountains in Colorado the weekend after I got back, and I sat down on my couch with my wife, and in like a flash of complete gnosis, for about 3 straight hours on a snowy Saturday afternoon in the Rockies, I downloaded all of the symbolism in 2001 to my wife, and she was completely pale by the end of it. And I said, I have no idea where that came from, or how the hell that came to me, but nevertheless, it did. And so then I went down to the local video store in the town, in the mountains, and I walked in the store to rent 2001 to watch it, and it was on the TV in the video store, and the kid running the video store was watching it, and I was the only one in the store. And I walked up to him and I said, why are you watching that movie? And he looked at me and he said, I have been trying to figure out what this film is saying for like 5 years now. And I said, well, I'd like to rent it. And I took it home and I watched it for the first time since I'd seen it in France, and confirmed everything that I had thought earlier that day. And then I wrote down the article Alchemical Kubrick over the next 3 or 4 days, to which right now I've gotten about 25 million hits on the article, and it's changed the face of Stanley, at least to the viewing public, and I have no doubt it's adding to his luster and legend and everything. And in the meantime, I had been doing work with alchemy, of course, because I've been researching, and I've been working with Richard Hoagland on some of his early lunar research, and came into contact via that research with hundreds and thousands of slides and movies of the Apollo landings. And I was spending my time looking through thousands of pictures, and when I started looking at 2001 over and over again, especially after I was able to purchase a DVD in 2003, I began noticing telltale fingerprints of a cinematic technique called front screen projection, which was being used not only during the ape scenes at the beginning of 2001, but also on the lunar surface scenes in 2001. And then I realized that there were certain telltale techniques and fingerprints which every front screen projection shot would leave behind. There's certain tricks that you had to have, just like a magician needs to have long sleeves on his coat in order to make the pigeon come out of the hat. And then I remembered the Apollo footage that I'd spent years in the early 90s with Hoagland going through, and rebooted up all my Apollo footage, started going through it, and lo and behold, there it was in every shot that had a background. I will differentiate between shots that don't have a background and shots that do have a background. Lo and behold, the same fingerprint of front screen projection is all over the Apollo footage, and that I knew in 2004 that the Apollo footage had been front screen projected, but I didn't want to come forward with it because I didn't want I didn't want to hurt Hoagland's research, which my findings would and did eventually hurt his research, because I do believe there's structures on the moon and on Mars and a lot of other places in the solar system. I've seen the proof. I've talked to people in NASA. I know that there is what is incredible proof of a previous civilization that had mastered the solar system. So anyway, I kept it quiet, and I kept it quiet. But then early last summer in June, I decided to watch The Shining, which I had not watched very often because I actually don't like the film very much, still don't actually. And I put it on my blue screen. I got a blue screen copy of it, and I put it on, and my wife was out, so I decided to just watch The Shining. And as I watched it, I realized that, having been a fan actually of the King book, and which was one of the reasons why I didn't like the Kubrick version, I realized that every single thing that Stanley had changed in the Stephen King book was telling a narrative, a completely different narrative than King intended, and a narrative that is at times at odds with the King story, and makes The Shining a difficult film to decipher on an overt level. But when I gathered all the facts, made a list of all the things that Kubrick had changed from King's original source material, I came up with another movie within a movie that was telling the story of what Stanley was going through as he directed the Apollo moon landings while simultaneously working on 2001, how it wore him out, how it almost destroyed his marriage, how he may have actually gotten someone accidentally killed because he wanted to tell someone. And at that point, the 40th anniversary of Apollo was coming, so I decided it was now time to release it because part of me thinks that Stanley wants it released, and so I released the two articles kind of about 2 months apart, caused a huge uproar. Discovery magazine called me a crackpot. The Hollywood Reporter, not the Hollywood Variety, said that I was truly a modern case of a conspiracy nut and total freak, and all sorts of names, and it's been a lot of fun. And now I'm going to be coming out soon. I'm maybe signing a book contract here soon, where I'll be coming out with the complete breakdown of Kubrick's films, including what would have been his absolute mind-blowing masterpiece had he lived long enough to make it. Are you there?
I'm here. I'm just listening. I'm with you.
All right. They really don't like this. Okay, so which will be the a combination of Eyes Wide Shut and AI, or artificial intelligence, in which now I can pretty much prove, despite Spielberg screwing up the original Kubrick idea, I can pretty much prove that
Here we go again.
What Stanley was trying to prove was he was trying to show that this world is ruled by a sex magic cult at the highest echelons, and that they're responsible for Project Monarch and Bluebird and Artichoke, and he was going into all of the covert operations and revealing how they work and what the reasons were for. And if they let me live long enough, I'll be able to tell somebody someday.
So let me ask you a question. Now, why do you think? First of all, do you think when you were sitting around in that snowy town in Colorado and with your wife, I mean, do you think that you were actually having contact with Kubrick in that moment?
Well, I really eschew channeling and think it's not a healthy thing. However, I will have to say that 2 or 3 things came through that day, which I still am at odds as to how I came up with them, including the fact that the screen and the monolith were the same size, which came in that day. But and then there's also the idea that Kubrick I do believe in the ka and the ba, the separation of bodies at death from the Egyptians, and so there could be a ka spirit, a residual of Stanley, still floating around for a little while after the death, looking for someone who had the disciplines of both alchemy and cinema, so that he could relate his alchemical story, because frankly it's impossible, pretty much almost impossible to find someone who's really interested in both. And so there was not many candidates if he was looking for someone to enter into and blow out the whole scene. And I'm pretty sure that Stanley really wanted people to know what was going on after The Shining, and I cracked The Shining, and after I realized what Eyes Wide Shut and AI were intended to be, I came away with a respect for Kubrick that is way beyond anything that I originally was coming up with, even with the alchemical stuff, because now I realize that he was risking everything and may have risked everything to try to tell us a story that is really one of the most frightening stories that there is, and that is that there's a cult that uses, gathering of chi from young children and women, and uses it to gain power over the human race. And that is a very sobering thought.
So where do you think, AI to me is really a fascinating piece of Kubrick's unfinished career. Where do you think he was taking AI? Or what's your thoughts about the trajectory from Eyes Wide Shut to AI?
Well, I don't think AI was a children's story in any way, shape, or form. Kubrick originally wanted the kid to be a CGI completely, with no human being, and Spielberg changed that. You have to. I don't want to go too far into this yet because it will violate certain things in my book contract. Okay. But what you have to ask yourself is a very serious question, which is, who would really want a little boy robot that never grows up? Does a mother really want a little boy that never grows up, never matures, never learns, never gets married, never goes to college? What group of people in society would really want to have a little boy that never grows up? And when you can answer that question, then we'll get into what Kubrick was getting into, which is something so far out and so beyond the pale that, I can imagine Spielberg's reaction when he first read the script. It's like, I don't know if you really want to do this, Stanley.
Yeah.
But the allusions in The Shining are very interesting. For instance, the letters of Stephen King, his initials are SK and Stanley's are SK. Diane Johnson wrote the script with Kubrick, and the two main characters, which are both aspects of Kubrick, have names that begin with D and J, just like her. Jack Nicholson, of course, played Jack Torrance, and Danny, I forget his name now, played Danny Torrance. So the actors were actually playing their own names. You can keep going through this. The original hotel, which was in Colorado, right near where I lived, that Stephen King used as inspiration for The Shining, was called the Stanley. You start going into this, and it's absolutely astonishing. The Volkswagen was invented by the same German scientists that invented the saucer technology, which I know Kubrick knew about, and were brought into NASA. And this is the Volkswagen that starts The Shining, which is really the history of NASA. Barry Nelson is wearing a wig that looks just like Jack Kennedy. He looks just like Jack Kennedy. He's cutting a deal with Kubrick, it's obvious.